为什么女老师没有人要呢？
What kind of female teachers are undesirable? I've noticed that female teachers are actually one of the hardest hit groups in the matchmaking market. Looking at the members we've recently worked with, from kindergarten to elementary, middle, and high school teachers, we've seen it all. These women have stable jobs. Most elementary and middle school teachers have government positions. They're good-looking, capable, and highly educated. But in the matchmaking scene, as soon as a man sees teacher on the profile, he says, "No thanks." So why don't men like female teachers? I asked a few guys, and here's what they said. Being a teacher does sound like a very respectable profession. But most of the women who manage to become teachers tend to have high standards and are very picky. During the matchmaking process, they have strict requirements for men in many aspects. So these men would rather approach younger, prettier girls, even if they're working as waitresses, than date slightly older, more selective female teachers. What do you think about that?
老师为什么会成为
Why is it that we, female teachers, have become one of the most rejected groups among so-called leftover women? Honestly, I used to think it made no sense. I mean, come on, being a teacher is still one of the most respectable, stable, and meaningful careers out there. We have financial independence, long vacations, and a deep understanding of how to raise and educate children. We're exactly the type of woman a man should want if he's thinking long-term. And yet, mention that you're a teacher, and most men immediately lose interest. No date, no conversation. Just a next. Why? Let me tell you my story, because, yes, I've lived this. I dated a guy who looked perfect on paper. Born in '92, 5 feet 10 inches, athletic, good-looking, ran his own business, made about $500K a year, owned a large, fully paid apartment in Chengdu, drove a luxury car. Honestly, that kind of man is a rare find, and he knew it. But guess what? I'm not exactly average either. I'm a Chinese language teacher at one of Chengdu's top private schools. I've got looks, intelligence, a good family background, a respected career, and I've worked hard for everything I've achieved. I don't need a man to save me. I want a partner who walks beside me, not behind me. At first, he was clearly impressed. He liked the fact that I wasn't just another pretty face. But that admiration quickly turned into discomfort. He started calling me too strong, too opinionated, and even too successful. Apparently, it bothered him that I had stories to tell about colleagues who traveled abroad, about the designer bags I bought with my money, about the powerful parents I met at school events. He told me I talked too much about other people's achievements, but what he really meant was, it made him feel small. You know what I realized? A lot of men don't actually want a woman who's smart. They want a woman who makes them feel smart. And when that illusion is broken, when they realize we can challenge them intellectually, that we're not impressed by their income alone, they panic. He also accused me of being controlling. Of bringing my classroom authority into our relationship. But let's be honest, when you're used to leading a group of students every day, managing deadlines, expectations, parents, and your own goals, you develop structure, discipline, standards. I expect clarity in communication. I don't tolerate emotional immaturity. And if that feels controlling to a man, maybe the problem is his lack of leadership, not my presence. Worse, he couldn't handle the way I carried myself around his family. My parents are working class too, and I love them deeply, but just because I wasn't overly submissive and grateful for his attention, he found me arrogant. Sorry, but I'm not going to beg for approval from someone just because he drives a fancy car. Respect has to go both ways. And then came the marriage talk, the moment men like him dread. I mentioned a reasonable dowry. I mentioned adding my name to the property. Nothing outrageous. Just the same things other women in my circle, with similar education and background, had received. He freaked out. Suddenly I was materialistic. Suddenly I was entitled. But let me ask you. When a man earns well and demands beauty, youth, submission, silence, that's preference, right? But when a woman with her life together sets boundaries, she's difficult. In the end, he told me, very seriously, that he would never date a teacher again. No matter how attractive she was. That he'd rather make 1,000 mistakes than end up with someone like me again. And you know what? Good. Go make your 1,000 mistakes. I'll be here, living well, thinking clearly, and refusing to shrink myself for a man's comfort. We're not intimidating. You're just insecure. So tell me, am I really the problem? Or are men just afraid of women who are no longer afraid to demand more? Let's be honest in the comments.
大家好，
Anna's back again with you all. Today I want to share a private message I received from a young man. He told me he has gone on more than 10 blind dates with female teachers, yes, over 10 elementary and middle school teachers, and he wanted to talk with me about some traits he's noticed when it comes to female teachers in dating or relationships. First, he introduced himself. He said he was born in 1990, so he's 32 now. He's 174 centimeters tall, about 5 feet 8 inches, which is not considered short. His family lives in a second-tier city, like Wuhan or Hangzhou. He drives a car worth about 600,000 yuan, around $80,000, and he's an only child. He said that the combined assets of his family, including his parents, real estate, and cash, total around 20 million yuan, roughly $2.75 million. So, honestly, hearing all this, I thought this guy comes from a pretty solid background. He said his looks are average, just a regular guy, not particularly handsome but not unattractive either. He works in a private company. It used to be a state-owned enterprise, but it got privatized, and now he's just a regular employee, nothing fancy. Then he told me that, with his background, his family began setting him up with female teachers. And really, for his profile, finding a partner who's an elementary or middle school teacher seems like a good match. But here's the issue. According to him, almost all of the teachers he met were very arrogant. Those were his exact words, arrogant and cold. And another very noticeable trait, they loved to PUA him. As in, saying things like, you don't understand how our system works, or you're not from the public sector, so you shouldn't comment on this, that kind of thing. He said those comments made him feel very uncomfortable, like he was being talked down to. The second thing he mentioned was how some of these teachers would say, I'm looking for someone with an interesting soul. You know, those girls who've read some literature and suddenly think they're deep and poetic. They'd throw out vague phrases he didn't even understand, and he'd just feel like, I'm clearly not enough for what they're talking about. So first they PUA him and say he doesn't get their world. Then they tell him his soul isn't interesting enough. Right? Third point. Many of these teachers were obsessed with a sense of ritual. They had high expectations around birthdays, holidays, random anniversaries. Everything had to be remembered and celebrated. If he forgot, they'd immediately go cold and ignore him. And not only that, they expected him to remember on his own. No reminders. He said his job keeps him really busy. He doesn't have time to spend every day worrying about emotional details. But even so, it felt like everything had to revolve around them. They were the ice, and he had to be the fire. Whatever they wanted, he had to guess it. Always had to be the one making moves, starting conversations, sending messages, calling. They never took the initiative. According to him, every single teacher he dated had this same pattern. And there's more, they loved giving lectures. If he did something they didn't like, the first reaction was complete silence. They would just ignore him. Then, when he finally reached out to ask what was wrong, that's when the scolding began. Long lectures, one after another, like he was a student. Only after unloading everything would they finally feel okay again and move on. In the end, he asked me to check with others. Have other guys who've dated female teachers experienced the same thing? Or did he just happen to meet a few particularly extreme cases? Alright, that's all I wanted to share with you today. Bye-bye.
女教师剩女
You know, lately I've noticed something. The number of female teachers over 30 who are still single is growing fast. And honestly, I completely understand why. In fact, let me be straightforward. I've personally decided I'm not going to date teachers anymore. Before anyone calls it prejudice, let me explain my point of view. First of all, it's just a fact. In the education system, especially in elementary and middle schools, there are way more women than men. That's because in teaching exams, women generally perform better, especially in areas like communication, comprehension, and expression. Not saying it's a bad thing, but it creates an imbalance. Out of every 10 teachers, 8 or 9 are women. So the chances of finding a partner within the same workplace are already slim. Here's another thing. I'm from a mid-sized city, but I moved to a bigger one to build my career. A lot of well-educated men do the same. We don't want to go back to small towns just to become school teachers in the public sector. We're chasing growth, building businesses, trying to achieve something bigger. That alone puts us in a different world from most teachers. But honestly, the biggest reason is the attitude I've seen in a lot of these women when it comes to relationships. With all due respect, many of the female teachers I've met have extremely high standards. They want someone stable with a government job, fixed salary, living in the same city, and of course, someone who's on their level financially, socially, and intellectually. That's not wrong. Everyone has the right to want the best. But the problem is, they treat those things like mandatory checkboxes, like they're choosing a business partner, not someone to build a life with. And beyond that, there's something that really bothers me: the emotional dynamic. Many of them are cold, distant, and still expect you to always be available, always attentive, always reading their mind. They never text first, never call, never initiate a conversation. But if you forget a special date or don't make a symbolic gesture, they'll go silent. Then comes the cold shoulder. And later, the lecture. Like you're one of their students. And what's worse, some of them say things like, "I'm looking for someone with an interesting soul," or, "I want deep conversations about art, literature, philosophy." But what they really mean is, someone who thinks exactly like them. If you don't, you're dismissed. I've heard more than once, "You don't understand how our system works," or "You're from the private sector. You don't know what real stability is." To me, that comes off as arrogant. And let's be honest, intelligence doesn't give anyone the right to act superior. Over time, I realized it's not really about the profession. It's about the mindset a lot of these women carry. And truthfully, I'm just not willing to live in that kind of dynamic anymore. There are amazing women out there in other fields who are more emotionally open, more grounded, more willing to build something together. That's the kind of partner I want. So no, it's not that I hate teachers. I'm just no longer interested in constantly being judged, tested, and expected to prove myself, while the other person sits back and waits for perfection. We all make our choices. This is mine.
嘿，我发现
Hey, I found something really interesting. When we work as teachers for a long time, the single rate is actually pretty high. There are many female teachers around me who are 27, 28, even 30 years old, and they still don't have a partner. Why is that? I've summed up what I've observed. Being a teacher is just too exhausting. On weekends, we're basically fully booked with classes. The job is physically draining. We're sore, our backs and waists hurt, and we're just completely worn out. Then when Monday to Friday comes around, we finally don't have as many classes, but we have to recover the energy we lost over the weekend. So during the week, we don't really like going out. We just want to stay cozy and comfortable at home. Also, teachers only interact with students and co-workers. There are very few chances to meet people their own age. And even when we do have free time, like I said, we don't feel like going out or socializing. We just want to rest at home and recharge. So look, these teachers are not only good-looking, but they also have stable incomes, secure jobs, and come from decent, well-off families. But they still can't seem to get into a relationship. Do you know anyone like that around you?
为什么女教师成了剩女？
Why have female teachers become the hardest hit group among leftover women? Have you noticed? These days, many female teachers have become one of the most troubled groups in the dating and marriage market. In theory, they have a lot of advantages: stable jobs, decent social status. So why are they now facing so much criticism in the matchmaking world? It might have to do with the profession itself. Maybe it's the long-term habit of managing students, but many female teachers tend to have strong controlling tendencies. They like to educate others, and they often have a strong desire to change or shape their partner. Men with stronger personalities usually can't stand being in a relationship like that. Even though teaching offers job stability, their social circles are small and closed. In these tight-knit environments, comparison becomes a constant, and it turns into pressure on the husband. My husband needs to be at least as good as hers. But the biggest issue is this: many female teachers have far higher standards when it comes to choosing a partner. Because of their respectable image in society, they expect to marry someone with even better qualifications than their own. As a result, it becomes hard to find a match, and they're usually not willing to settle, which only adds to the growing number of single women in the profession. Now don't get me wrong, if you're an outstanding man, a female teacher can absolutely be a great choice for marriage. But what was once considered the most stable and easy-to-marry profession has now become a hot potato. In the past, female teachers, being part of the civil service, were highly sought after. Today, however, their work is far from easy. The pressure is huge, with job titles, performance reviews, and office politics all leading to intense competition and comparison. Maybe because they spend so much time managing students, many female teachers develop a strong need to control everything, including their partner's hobbies and daily habits. At best, it shows up as constant critique. At worst, it becomes outright micromanagement. The advantages of being a teacher are no longer as obvious as they once were, and the disadvantages are becoming more and more apparent, especially as they get older. Most of them are highly educated with high expectations, and it becomes harder to find men who meet their standards. They follow the mindset of better to be single than to settle, so marriage just keeps getting pushed further away. On top of that, nearly 90% of female teachers go straight from school into teaching, from one academic bubble to another. They live in a very narrow social environment, and many have never really experienced the larger outside world. Their understanding of society tends to be shallow and often quite distorted. You could say they're a group that lives disconnected from real-world dynamics. This disconnect leads many teachers to misjudge their own position in the dating market. They have value, no doubt, but there's simply no demand. And every year, younger, fresher female teachers enter the scene. If the older ones don't lower their standards even a bit, how can they possibly compete? Being a female teacher over 30 doesn't mean you're not marriage material. It's not about lacking qualities. The problem is that many struggle to assess themselves realistically. If someone is, say, a 7 out of 10 but sees herself as a 9, she'll look for a man who's a 9 or above, and that just doesn't match up. Most female teachers live comfortably. Many have their own homes, cars, savings, solid incomes. But they refuse to look for partners with less than they have, insisting on finding someone who is financially and socially superior, because only then do they feel balanced. But here's the reality: the wealthier a man is, the less he cares about a woman's financial status. What he values is her looks, temperament, how she handles a home, how she speaks, all the soft skills, not whether she owns an apartment. If your only goal is to find someone better than you, then aren't you just turning yourself into a product? There's a popular quote: "How could a woman who's been loved by a lion ever fall for a stray dog?" Sounds empowering, right? But the sad truth is, many women who think they've been loved by a lion were really just one more in his rotation. For most ordinary people, the best outcome is still to find a reliable partner, someone to face life's challenges with. And that kind of reliability isn't about romantic fairy tales, but about being stable, hardworking, responsible, respectful to both families, and free from harmful habits. We're adults. It's time to stop living in a fantasy. Take an honest look at your strengths and weaknesses, understand your true value in the real world, and stop aiming higher than what actually matches your reality.
In the end, when we look at all these stories, frustrated men, demanding women, the exhausting routine of teachers, and the rising tide of loneliness, it's clear that the problem isn't just one side or the other. It's a mismatch of expectations, ego, and reality. A lot of these women say that men don't like intelligent women. At first glance, that sounds like an arrogant excuse. Like saying, "I'm amazing, they just can't handle me." But to be honest, there's a grain of truth in that. Personally, I'm attracted to intelligent women. But I also understand how difficult it can be to actually be in a relationship with one. When you're with a woman who's, let's say, more simple, handling conflict is much more straightforward. In an argument, sometimes you can just agree with something illogical, nod, and that's enough to end the discussion. But try that with a woman who's just a little bit more intelligent. She'll see right through it. She'll notice that you're dodging, using tricks to end the conversation. And the discussion doesn't end, it grows, deepens, branches out. And if you're not emotionally and mentally prepared, it can be exhausting. That's why so many men, often without even realizing it, prefer women who are less intellectually sharp. Not because they're worth less, but because they're simply easier to deal with. Less emotional effort, less mental gymnastics. But that easier path comes with a price. shallower conversations, less challenge, less growth. And that applies to both sides. Many female teachers, for example, have everything going for them: stability, intelligence, education, character. But they lock themselves into such a specific and high standard for a partner that the real world just can't deliver. They want someone better than them in every way, but refuse to admit that the dating market isn't filled with perfect men just waiting to be chosen. Meanwhile, the men who could actually be great partners but aren't perfect are rejected. And these women remain single more and more frustrated, blaming the world for their own loneliness. In the end, maybe the problem isn't intelligence. Maybe what scares people off isn't what someone knows, but how rigid they've become. The lack of lightness, of flexibility, of balance. A healthy relationship isn't one where one person wins the argument. It's one where both people grow without needing to beat the other. So, what do you think about this dilemma? Do men really fear intelligent women? Or are some women just setting the bar too high for the reality we live in? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you in the next video.